Today I spoke with Prajin Shee, who is the CTO of Grey Line Media. Now, Grey Line Media do a bit of everything. They do a bit of video and media and podcasting, actually. But they also build websites for financial advisors. Prajin and I spoke all about their website process, including their agile processes, actually. And in this discussion, we touch on kind of managing the kind of difficulties of working with startups. We also talk about built-in quality when it comes to MVP as well. And we also talk about how to become more aligned with the agile process. And if you are following on, why not download my Agile Lingo book? So if there's any terms or anything that's mentioned in this episode, you can quickly look it up in plain English without any fluff at all. You can download it for free at leanpub.com/agile-lingo. You also get access to my Discord community, which you can join now for free. But if you download the book, you actually get access to a kind of private channel where you can just discuss all things agile and anything kind of related to the book. I'll leave links to everything in the description below. This was a really interesting chat. So if you are working with startups or you're trying to implement agile and are struggling to do so, then listen on in.
Just to give you a brief context of where I'm at. So like about a year or so ago, me and my business partner, who's based in the US, started a media agency. So we have a couple of components to that company. Well, it's podcasting, video editing, and our real strong suit is development. Specifically WordPress, but we also are working in Shopify and Webflow. So we have about 14 team members, and that includes our video editors, sound engineers, and about 6 or 7 developers, which are HTML developers, PHP developers, and then the graphics designers. So it's separated in terms of each component of development. We've been running about a year now. Initially, our niche was targeted towards financial advisors in the US.
That's cool. And then what's your role then within the company?
Yeah, so I am the CTO and I also project management and operations. So right now my main focus is on working on the processes. So we have talented developers, we create good products, but we don't necessarily have a consistent process. And that's where we see like a discrepancy in our final product. We know we have the talent, but hey, sometimes X takes a little longer than other. Oh, we're missing out a couple of quality assurance checks over here. And that's where I am finding the largest problem. And I want to address that before we scale even further.
Set the foundations there, get that rock solid, and then build from that. Yeah. And where does your gut tell you? You know, you've identified there's a process issue, but have you done any kind of like internalization on where you feel like specifically might lay?
So I think there are a couple of areas. One is what we've done recently is so we use a project management tool, Zoho, and there's so many automations that we can do, and we've also recently started using Zapier. And that's helped us a lot just to streamline all of our things, to have a report generated at the end of the week, and we have all the checks and balances. So that's helped a lot. But a couple of things is the actual development life cycle and when we're actually delivering a product to a customer. So Agile is a popular thing, and it's kind of like, hey, get your MVP out there, show it to the client, and keep iterating. How does that work in a real world scenario when a client doesn't understand tech? They're like, hey, this doesn't work, but that's an MVP. You know, they don't understand it like that. They want a perfect product. So what's that balance of how do you keep improving, getting that quality to the level that a client wants, and beyond in a tech aspect, communicating tech to people who aren't tech savvy. I think that's a magical place that very few people have reached, but that's where I'm trying to get. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, just a few things. I mean, I didn't know Zoho had any project management tool. What is that? Is that like a Kanban board? Is that, you know, and that's working fine for you? You're able to do the work.
Essentially, yeah. And the real thing is, are we using? Because at the end of the day, a tool is just a tool, and it's how you use it. Are we using it correctly? Are our bugs being pushed out correctly? Are we prioritizing work correctly? And I guess that's a more complicated issue, but something we're slowly addressing, and trying to have a consistent view of how, okay, a bug comes in, is it a 24-hour release, or is it, how are we going to target each of these subtasks? So yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is actually that you're fairly confident in the technology that's facilitating your workflow process is fairly good. I mean, but it's more about the kind of soft process around that, and you'd be happy to pivot and use a different piece of software if you need to. There's tools at the end of the day. They're only supposed to facilitate that. It's just whether you're running the right processes for the tools to then to facilitate that process. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, I guess the eventual goal is like, how do the processes run themselves on autopilot?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And like you said, when we need to build a foundation now, so that in year 2, year 3, year 5, we're not nitpicking. Oh, this is not done on time. This is not done first. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm just going to make some notes. I mean, obviously topical because I just released the Agile book. I think there might be some just a lot, not alignments. I think I don't doubt that you understand Agile and what it's trying to do. I think there might be some communication refinements that can happen with the client, because MVP, and I say this in the book, and that sounds like such a plug, but it's not. I say this in the book. MVP is such a misunderstood term, and a lot of businesses are trying to. They think MVP is getting just something up, whether it's rickety or whether it's broken or whatever. That's not. MVP is almost a reduced scope version of your website or your product. Now, Agile, it never dictates. There's a term called built-in quality when it comes to Agile. And there should be systems and checks in place through automated testing. So there's regression testing, unit testing, quality assurance, built-in quality, that every single task that makes it into that piece of software, even if that software is a contact form on a splash page, right? That the quality is there. And you never sacrifice that quality. So when you say the client wants to, expects quality and all the rest of it, it should be there, and they should never doubt that reaching MVP will ever sacrifice that quality. And this is how I do it. As an example, I explain MVP, and people, we use MMP, minimum marketable product, MLP, minimum lovable product. All these different terms are trying to steer people away from this misnomer, which is MVP is a rough and ready version of your product, which isn't the case. And the way I phrase it is that I want to get you earning money sooner, so that you're not waiting around for this website to be done. We can get you to a point where you're earning money and you're not waiting around, and we're not, things aren't getting pushed back, and we're trying to bite off more than we can chew. Let's get you to a point where you're earning money that we can revisit. And there's two benefits to that. And again, I'm probably not teaching you to suck eggs, but the two benefits of that are, one, you're earning the money. 2, you're getting something out there where you're able to then learn from that. So yes, you've got this big kind of lofty goal of this product or this website that wants to do X, Y, Z, but let's keep that, and let's keep dreaming of that, but be open to change. And that's what Agile is all about. And so by getting something out sooner, you can start to get that feedback, and you can actually make a pivot. And weirdly, from a psychological standpoint, you get something out and you're just like, all that stress is now, we've got something out there, all that stress, and you're able to kind of think a little bit more clearly, and the business is able to think a little bit more clearly. So when you say, a client doesn't want, they want a polished thing, they should be absolutely reassured along the way that through the agile methodologies and whatever one you choose to do, that you're not willing to sacrifice what gets released. It will be the best it can be, but let's just reduce our scope a little bit and leverage those things, leverage that learning, leverage that mental break that you get from just releasing something, and that's the case. And that often works. Like, we worked with a client last year, and they wanted loads and loads of stuff, and it was like, look, let's, again, the same speech, let's get this to a point where it's going to earn you money, and let's see where we are after that. And lo and behold, we get to that point. They're really happy with their MVP solution, and they said 300 times ROI on the website, and it's like,
Okay. Wow.
I think it's just a way of phrasing this agile process rather than and clearing up some of those misnomers. Like I say, like MVP should not sacrifice quality. Well, agile doesn't allow you to sacrifice quality. There's this other thing called a hardening sprint, which is, and we've done it a couple of times. It's all, nobody's perfect, but it's this, a hardening sprint is a sprint where it's like, right, we've made a few sacrifices along the way. We've got a bit of technical debt. This needs tidying up. There's a document that needs to be written. Let's just spend the week just kind of doing those things. And unfortunately, it's not a good thing, because your quality should be built in. You've got this thing called an acceptance criteria, which is like, right, what do we need to hit? What are these checkpoints we need to hit on every single task that means it's done? And that's the definition of done. Does it need to pass all unit tests? Do unit tests need to be written and passed? Does it need to run past this particular person? Does design need to see it? All these kind of checks are in place, and only then can we consider it done. And if it's not passing those things, then you're not building in that quality. So it's a case of a hardening sprint should never kind of happen. So where does that sit with you, and how does that feel in terms of that perspective on the approach with clients?
No, absolutely. I mean, I see two huge pros, especially working with several clients halfway through a project, or like once we've built a large portion of the project. There is a scope creep, not necessarily in terms of what they want, but also their vision for the business. And by having that MVP, a polished MVP, it also gives them the opportunity to kind of say like, hey, we're in the right direction, or we want to skew it a bit in a different direction. So that's a really interesting point. It gives them also the opportunity to tell us, hey, pause, maybe we can try this approach, before we've already created a huge membership site with 7 third-party APIs, So yeah, that's really interesting. But another thing that you said, which really interested me, was the checks, like the checks on every single aspect of the technical process. Is that something that you have built in your processes in terms of, let's say it's a sign-up form, something like a simple sign-up form? Do you actually have a checklist that these are the criteria that need to be checked before we can say that this particular component is done? Is there an actual physical checklist?
Yeah. It's in the Trello card, or it's in the Zoho, the task that it's represented. A lot of these systems, they allow you to, when you create a card, it kind of builds out. Jira does it, and various things like that. But absolutely, it's a physical checklist that you tick off, and just make sure all these things are done. There's no lingo, there's no jargon there. It's literally a checklist, So establishing that, and that should be a team decision. Then that should be like, right, what do we think that needs to happen for this task to get done? And because every team is different, and that's, I think, what was it? One of the points in the Agile Manifesto. It's like this idea that it's tools and people and communications over tools and processes, and it's this idea that because every team is different and they're going to work differently and every project's going to be different. Let's agree together on certain things that we think are important. Maybe the client doesn't appreciate design. I think that's a silly example, but maybe they don't appreciate design. So maybe design is not that, part of your definition of done or anything like that, but it definitely helps for everyone to feel like their perspective is being listened to on projects. So agreeing that with the team. I mean, again, you want to productize as much as you can. So obviously you're probably going to have in your mind defaults in place, those standardized ideas, and then going from there. But again, every project's different, every budget is different. You're not going to be able to, this is all time at the end of the day that it's being spent on. And that's potentially one criticism of Scrum. There's a lot of ceremonies, a lot of like things you need to do and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes Kanban is just let's just get it done. But if these things help build in that quality and create that reassurance, then there's no harm in at least having a starting point that you believe is a definition of done sort of thing.
Absolutely. That's really interesting, yeah.
The other thing is, as well, you mentioned businesses being able to kind of pivot and change and stuff like that. And I think that's screaming the importance of having a solid kind of, when you kind of kick off a project, what is your process there? Like, do you have a strategic kind of workshop? Do you have any kind of onboarding?
Absolutely. I guess there are a couple of steps. One is kind of getting the scope from the client, which I think is a standard approach. But then how do we communicate that scope to the different departments? Since we're multidisciplinary in the sense it's not just one team that's going to work on a project. There's that initial meeting with the creative lead, a tech lead, and the PM, kind of like who's the person who's going to actually communicate with the clients, so like the account managers. So we have all the key stakeholders. Without getting technical, we kind of build out the narrative of what the project is and in the progression of the project. So very loosely, we kind of sit together and work down the timelines, and then it kind of auto-populates. So if it's a podcast, we know that, okay, we need the podcast on raw file on this day. 48 hours from then, we'll have to have the thumbnail, executive summary, something published on Libsyn. So those processes are already inbuilt, but to kind of figure out the narrative and the timeline, that's more of a call, a discussion, a brainstorming session, playing around with the project management tool, and then agreeing upon it and getting a final sign off from the client. Hey, this is our projected timeline and this is what we're looking at. This is how it's going to be broken together. Here are our deliverables. And it's very collaborative and flexible, because what we've noticed is things change, and we need to be ready to adapt to those changes. It's not just on our side, but like where we understand that the client's positions may change, because businesses evolve, nothing is static, and that's kind of how we work as well. Within, obviously, we're not going to work an extra 100 hours, within reason. We're quite accommodating and expect that accommodation back when teaming up. So we don't even like to say we work for a client, we work with a client. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like the overarching process.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I use I think that terminology is so important to use. Like, it shouldn't be a for. It should be it depends what you're doing at the end of the day. If you are happy with that, client vendor relationship, but I prefer the companionship that you make with a client. But the reason why I ask, and you've touched on some good points there as well, is just because businesses do change. I wonder, and there's something we work into our kind of strategic process, is it's trying to understand the actual business. Two aspects: the business goal, like what are the business trying to achieve right now? What is that? For me, it's the vision statement that really highlights this, because you can have a vision, but how the business achieves that vision can manifest in so many different ways. And by understanding the vision, for me, it feels like they can pivot around it if they want to, for instance, I don't know, feed 100,000 homeless people. That's their vision. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's a website, it doesn't matter if it's a podcast, it doesn't matter whether it's a, you know, whatever. But understanding that vision allows them to be very flexible on how they, you know, how they go about doing that. And the reason why we try and understand that is because it allows us to work together in that they know that we are on the same lines, and that the decisions we make or the suggestions that we make are kind of aligned to that vision. So working, and you tell me, like, let me know if that's something you're doing, but understanding the vision of the business itself, and also what is the goal, what is the vision of the project. They're the sort of, I imagine it like kind of like a pendulum, I guess. You know, you've got this point, you've got this anchor point, and then there's things kind of swinging around. That's what I like to think of these vision statements, and that's why we try and get those out of the client. And is that something that you work with them on, or try and facilitate out of them?
So, yes, we do, and I think that does help us figure out their goals. Often, clients don't even have a well-defined vision, but let's say they do, and they communicate that with us. The real issue is for that vision to translate into product. So we might understand, hey, this is where they want to be, but communicating that to PM, PM to developer, developer to tester, often, and I do think it's a challenge, is to get that to go down into every role. So when they build something, it's not, hey, I'm building to make something work, but I'm building to satisfy a requirement to build something that aligns with a vision, you know? So I think there's often a disconnect in that when you can't really necessarily communicate the vision of another company to your team, and that to reflect the product. So that's a part of quality. Yeah. Quality is not just, hey, does everything work and does it look good, but does it make sense? If a product works, it doesn't mean that it's a good product and it's satisfying the requirements and going above and beyond.
How are you communicating that at the moment then? What's your
To be honest, it's frankly not done very well. I mean, we have the initial in the sense that we have room to improve. It's just that general team meeting. So we do Scrum meetings. We do daily Scrum meetings, and that's when I get the chance to kind of communicate things very quickly to people. I can be like, hey, we're kind of moving away from the whole concept, and that's where we try to make sure everyone's aligned in the same direction. But yeah, there's definitely a place where I feel like sometimes we skew away from why we're building a product. You know.
Do you feel that why changes then throughout a project?
Absolutely. I mean, unless you're focused on the goal, you're like a blind man, and you know, you're just keeping on going. You might end up in the right place, but you would have taken a long route or something like that, and that's the thing. How am I getting from A to B? Is a big component. Yeah, so I'd love to know. So how would you communicate, let's say, a client's vision and actually get that vision represented in the product? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tricky because I don't know which end to start. But one thing that is unfortunate potentially, some people who are implementing, whether it's design, development, or whatever, sometimes they don't care as much as you want them to. Being someone who owns their business and all the rest of it, your heart and soul is in almost every single project, hopefully. And the realization is is that that does not trickle down to people who just want a paycheck at the end of the day. It doesn't mean to say they don't exist. I was, an employee at one point, and I would really try, and every meeting I would go in and, come out the end of the day with a headache just because I've been thinking so passionately about these things. These people do exist, obviously, but it's that recognition that sometimes it's not always going to be the case, right? Just with that as a kind of foundational thing. Working from the other end, when we do our onboarding or the scoping workshops, we involve the kind of leads of each department. Because one, they can input into the strategic process anyway. So that's a lead developer, that's a lead designer, UX or something like that. So you've got these what we call consultants, right? They're the ones who do a lot of the thinking, and sometimes they even hand that work off to people. So they're doing a lot of the strategic thinking, the kind of problem solving aspect, and also and they get to hear it from the horse's mouth, the vision. So there's an incentive there. Well, not an incentive, but there's a point there which the people who are defining the solution are hearing and listening to that vision, and they aren't it's not just, oh, you're a designer, I'm going to put you into the meeting. For me, they're people who show interest in whenever I interview them, for a job or whatever. I'm always interested to know, like, what gets their gears going, like, and are they and what is their methodology for scoping out a project and all the rest of it, and if they mention along the lines of what are the business goals, what is it trying to achieve, those kind of if they're asking those kinds of questions, then I know they're the personality, and they have the skill set to be involved in those initial meetings, and they're the ones defining the solution. And from that point onwards, there's not. I mean, I have an onboarding meeting with the team, absolutely. Like we discuss like what was learned from the discovery, the strategic scoping session, what was learned there, and we communicate that vision then to the team at that point. From there, I'm not happy to let it go, of course, but I'm almost expecting that they are just some of those individuals are just there to implement the work. But I know the strategic consultants who are there in the workshop, they're building that vision and that methodology into the project, because that's their skill set. There's two types of workers, I find: those who cannot function without the requirements, and those who cannot function without the vision. And that's the separation there between like people who just give me a bunch of stuff to do, I'll do it. They don't care to think, they don't want to think, or whatever. And they're good. They're like foot soldiers at the end of the day. They just kind of get the work done, and you need them. And then the others who cannot function without the vision, and they're the ones who I expect to carry out that vision and to constantly remind themselves of why are we doing this, what is the purpose of it, and challenge when things change. Challenge that and say, well, this is the goal of the project. How is this falling in line with that? And that tends to work with me. So it's in the interview process really where that understanding starts, but you can't force people to you can't just shake them until they just take that vision in mind. It's a bit of sort of prep work in the beginning, just to kind of understand where their moral compass lies, sort of thing. So the only sticking point there, which you mentioned as well for me, is if the sort of vision changes and whatever. And I'm not sure I have a fantastic answer for that, because for me a vision shouldn't change. And I'm not sure whether this is more of a financial issue for you, whether they change something and you're having to shift or pivot or whatever, whether that's the issue here, or whether it's the product itself suffering and the quality of the product itself suffering because of that change in vision. Like, what for you is the issue with a vision changing during the life cycle of a project?
I mean, it's several fold. I guess the main issue, which I often find, is a vision and a goal are two separate things. And I feel like often what businesses do, they have short-term goals, or they have a particular, it's not necessarily clear set, their vision. And what happens is, once we start building out a product, and your vision might skew a bit and it might change, you want to address a larger community or a smaller community, naturally the product will change, the functionalities will change, and then as an effect, it's time, it's money, it's aligning the team again to the change in the client's business. Because you know, we need to kind of like get inside the client's head, because especially working with SMEs, not even SMEs, let's say startups, they're keeping on changing. You know, they get funding, they think they have a great idea, but they're still, okay, this is our market, that is our market, our vision is X by this year. And to be at the same pace as them, it isn't easy. And I haven't found a solution for that, apart from like chasing after them. You know, it's like a race. They know where they're going because it's in their head, but the rest of us is kind of just like, oh, he means this or she means that, and we're like meandering through this product build because we want to build a great product, but it's yeah, and the thing is, it's not a well-defined vision. And when we have our initial chats, we try to get that out from a client. We try to build that. Okay, so you mean this, and this is exactly what you want, and we try to provide the solution as much as possible. But unless that's internal, unless that's coming from the individual, it's bound to skew at times, and that's what I've seen.
Yeah, like going back to the startup thing, like that's just always going to be the case. I don't think you think the startup is changing. No. The founder is changing, and everyone else is trying to keep up with the founder.
Yeah.
It happens all the time, and I'm sure they're just as kind of frustrated with the founder or the vision as much as you are, and you know you're playing catch up to those people playing catch up, you know, probably, but that's an assumption, but you know, I've seen that a lot. It would be interesting to see or understand how deep into the Scrum methodology you guys are doing, because Scrum is good for that. I think you should have those systems and checks in place where you're protecting 2 weeks worth of work. Once you've got those 2 weeks worth of work, the client and everyone should be aware that is it. Like, things could change. There could be a bomb could go off or something, but the sprint is protected until you get to that end, and that's why you do the presentation, you say where they are, and you create that alignment on any kind of business updates. Maybe there's a business update process in place in that review, that sprint review portion or ceremony of the sprint. So I wonder whether there's some using the Scrum framework a bit more rigidly, and to bear that in mind, that if you are working with a startup, things could change, and that you have that point every single 2 weeks or however long your sprint is, to get that feedback and understand, right, where are we, what are the latest updates. And your product owner as well should be the one who is constantly in touch with the business as well. So when it comes to sprint planning, they're only allowing cards, or they're working behind the scenes to prioritize the backlog to be in line with the kind of the new sprint goal or the business requirements or something like that. So I feel like Scrum is a good framework, and maybe it's worth looking a bit more deeply into that. But the other aspect of this is a mindset thing, and I completely sympathize with things constantly changing, and it's just sometimes it's very, very frustrating. But again, going back to the kind of Agile method manifesto, is around this idea that we should welcome change, and it should be something that we're not necessarily like mentally affected by.
I'm not sure what you want me to change.
Siri just thinks I'm talking to Siri. Not sure what I said there to prompt him, but it's being open and welcome to change is part of Agile, and maybe it's a case of reminding that the team or the client even that you're happy to adjust and pivot, but there needs to be some sort of rigor and reassurance that you're not just being pulled around on an every other day basis, that once that sprint is set in place, that's it, and you go for it. Do you know what I mean? So there could be something there. There could be a bit of communication around Agile and what we're here to do and how we respond to change, or it could be more of a looking more in depth at your process when you are working with startups, and that you do have that kind of check in place to say, right, are we still going along the same lines? We've got this product. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, you tell me. I can't imagine it changes too dramatically whenever whenever changes do happen.
No, not necessarily, but as decoupled as software can be, a minor change affects, plausibly, may affect feature number 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. And this is more of a technical thing, but whether it's a compatibility issue or a conflict between a couple of codes. So it's not necessarily, like, in the outset, a change may seem small, but it affects,
Absolutely.
X, Y, and Z. Communicating that and having that delivered. So, like, we want to deliver products quickly, yes, sure, but we want to have bug-free products. Mm-hmm. And that involves, that iteration, that testing. But when we keep getting change from left, right, and center, hey, we need this. Let's say a member of a community said they want this feature. Mm-hmm. Yes, let's prioritize this. We move every couple of low priority stuff to the backlog. We add this to the next sprint. Mm-hmm. And you get that from like 3 or 4 different places from the same client. And managing the sprint is just like, you just can't control it. You're just getting stuff from everywhere, and they're different components. Mm-hmm. Things break.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and again, I wonder is Scrum a more tight connection to Scrum might help here. But again, you've got this idea of definition of ready, which is, okay, we've got this requirement. It's this new feature that we need to build in. That cannot just enter the current sprint because the sprint is protected. And then we need to, again, this is the same as definition of done. It's an agreed upon, acceptance criteria basically before it can be accepted. And it feels like, yes, it might have a knock-on effect, but what a business analyst would do, or potentially a product owner or someone assigned to that task, they might collect requirements from different people to understand the overall impact of this thing. It's a risk assessment in some cases. In this case, it sounds like specifically it would be a risk assessment. It's like, right, before we do this, we need to just understand the effect it's having. And that could be, yes, the work is still going on, but you pull a developer over and say, hey, we've got this requirement. What are your thoughts around it? Do you think it's going to affect anything? Blah, blah, blah. And that kind of, the kind of, not acceptance criteria, but the information, the requirements gathering of that particular card is understood, that could potentially be fed back to the business to say, right, we've done a kind of risk assessment on this ticket. This is what we feel like it's, what it's going to break. You could potentially get a bit more of a feel, or well, if it's going to break X, Y, Z, if the effect of this me changing the size of this logo is going to affect, system A and system B, then maybe it's not worth bringing in or something like that, rather than kind of blindly accepting it and chucking it into the sprint. So maybe a bit more rigor around the risk assessment of bringing in something, and not being afraid just to pull a developer aside for half an hour to chat about something. There's this thing called Three Amigos, which is again just three people, business analyst, quality assurance, and a developer, pulled into a room just to kind of talk about a particular ticket, and then you understand the implications, and then potentially there could be smaller subtasks off of that start to prepare for something like that. Maybe an API needs to be rewritten or something like that. Well, we can rewrite that API to accept both things, and then that's something that can be done without affecting too much. But yeah, again, a bit more rigor around not just accepting things at face value and chucking it into the sprint. It's again, I feel like when you're aligned to that business vision, you're able to sympathize with the business and sort of, if something smells a bit funny, that you're able to be like, right, okay, we're going to take a look at this. I'm not sure if this aligns, or I'm not sure if this is the best thing for the project, but let me do a bit of fishing around, come back, and then there's your risk assessment. I mean, it used to be, project management used to be a big old risk assessment piece, and luckily with Agile, it's a bit more kind of quick fire, and you're able to get some answers or general idea. But trying to protect that sprint is kind of key to that sort of thing, because again, it's just going to frustrate everyone. Just like, hey, Wednesday, I know we've just started the sprint on a Monday. Let's all we've got to change to this now, which means rewriting all of our APIs or something like that. So it's just going to piss everyone off, and they're not going to carry. You mentioned about them not carrying that vision. It's hard to when you're constantly being thrown around and it's like, oh, it's changed and whatever. So it's meeting in the middle, I guess, a little bit.
That's actually really interesting. I mean, and I think maybe that's something that we may need to, like our team needs to reconsider, is to be more strict on our sprints. Right now, we're very loosely follow the Agile methodology. Like, maybe get into it more seriously and actually, all those, and as you mentioned, those physical checklists and stuff, we have it for some things, but maybe for really document all our processes, what is done and what affects A, B, and C. That's something which I can see would have great effect on our final quality. So yeah.
Yeah, I think so, because I mean, you've got Agile, which is this mindset, this overall vision, and then you've got Scrum, which is this methodology, this implementation of that mindset with a bit more framework around it, and it's still a very, very light framework. You can pick up a lot of the kind of default, the ceremonies themselves, very, very quickly. A few of those ideas. It's not a heavy read if you were to sit down with the Scrum Alliance and have a look at some of the things in place. On the one hand, I'm thinking you don't necessarily need to understand a lot of them, just follow it. I think that's an okay place to kind of start, but what you get is a lot of people who just blindly follow something and not really understanding why they're doing something. So it's definitely worth that extra kind of like that process of kind of understand what the real thing is here. But startups, I think Scrum is a very good place to be. It's a good method. It's the most widely used Agile methodology, to be fair, and it's for a good reason. Even scaled Agile, which is for big organizations where you've got layer upon layer, or levels they call them, they use Scrum at the core. You've got these individual Scrum teams. You still have Scrum underneath it, But yeah, so I think that could help you. Cool.
Yeah.
Should we wrap it up there then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was super valuable. I really enjoyed that chat.
Nice. Is there anything, what was your kind of key takeaways from that? Is there anything that you're kind of eager to implement or change or do anything with that now?
Yeah, a couple of things. One really is to actually get my Scrum foundations. I mean, I have a very loose idea of it, and we've just been running our business without really pushing and being strict on that, or any framework. So I think really getting down to, like you said, maybe pick up a book and actually get the theory and practically implement it, be more strict about how we run our sprints, and start from, yeah, I mean, that's the starting point where, like, the first action point for me is be more strict on our sprints and go from there.
Yeah. And it's like I say, it's like a page or two. The Scrum framework's very light. It's something that, but I think there's a lot of these things are that they're intentionally there to solve some of the issues that you're having specifically. So it just felt quite right there to recommend that. So, and the only thing is, it's just it make it work for you, but it can feel like there's just lots of ceremonies, and it's like, oh, we've got sprint planning now.
Yeah.
Oh God, can't be asked, and all this kind of stuff. But these things are there. Try it. If it works for you, keep going with it. If you start to see if you start to see progress with that, if not, just maybe tailor it or make something that works. At the end of the day, it's just a framework for you to customize and whatever. But it'd be interesting to know if you do start to use that and whether you do see an improvement. It would be good to catch up and
Yeah, definitely.
see what happens there. But cool,
Awesome.
nice
I-
one, Prajin.
Yeah,
That was a really good
absolutely.
chat.
Yeah, it was. I really appreciate your time. It means a lot to me.
No worries.
All right.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day then, and we'll catch up soon.
All right, Samuel. Thanks for that.
Take care. Bye bye.
Ciao. Bye.
I just want to say a big thank you to Prajin again. That was a really cool conversation. Like I say, if you're learning Agile and you want no fluff answers to some of the jargon that's in Agile, then head on over to leanpub.com/agile-lingo, where you can download my book for free. And lastly, if this is the sort of content you're interested in, then let me know, because this was kind of a new thing for me. So do let me know. Like the video if you want to see more of it, and I'll see you down in the comments.